Thank you very much, Tim, for this beautiful and deeply thought-provoking talk. You certainly opened up a number of curious points that surely the audience would love to explore more with you. At this point, then, we would like to invite the audience to post any questions you may have for our president. Meanwhile, we can begin with some questions that are already here. First of all, you spoke about the importance of a beginner's mind. Can you please explain more about why it is important and how one might attain it?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question, Elena. The idea of a beginner's mind, I think the way I shared it was with the the Zen concept of the comparison between the expert's mind, which is closed, and the beginner's mind, which is open. But I think it's something that occurs across all the spiritual traditions I'm aware of. I know in the Bible, they talk about how you must become as a little child to enter into the kingdom of heaven. But it's, when we talk about what is it, oftentimes you end up talking about how it is we can develop this, but it's something that's always present. Krishnamurti made the statement about truth, how it's a pathless land. So truth is this land, in his way of describing it, where nothing has been disturbed. There aren't these imprints and paths that are cut into it. And then you take the other hand, where you have H.P. Blavatsky, where she said, in talking about the direction toward truth, that it is arrived at along a path that is steep and thorny and beset with all sorts of obstacles. So the beginner's mind is something that is present, but it's covered over. So part of what it is that we do, part of the idea of practice, is that the uncovering, the unconditioning from the layers and layers of ideas and cultural impositions that we've accepted and claimed. As we can root those out, then we find ourselves in a place that is childlike, not childish, childlike and fresh. We see through unclouded eyes. And this is part of the idea of practice and the kind of constant application in order to keep the normal currents from just overwhelming us as they do.
Thank you for that. You said that it is possible to create a space that is constantly untroubled and therefore open to the deeper layers of consciousness. So would you speak more about how one can create this untroubled space and then bring it from moment to moment?
Yeah, sure. It's something where, again, when I find myself talking, I really have to go back and kind of check on what it is that I said, so I'm not misleading. When I talk about creating a space, again, this kind of center that we could describe as an eye of the storm is not something that really needs to be created. Again, it is constantly there, and it's an aspect of our being. The problem for us is that it's not a place that we frequent very often. So we find ourselves with a great treasure inside of us, but unless we take the time to put ourselves closer to that, then we don't experience it as deeply in our lives. So part of what we end up doing is we end up with these sorts of practice where we draw closer. Rumi, I love checking in with Rumi and the other mystics who have tried to speak about these things. He has this often quoted expression that out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field. And in that field, when the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. That's the space that doesn't change, but that we have to, regularly try to move ourselves to live more closely to that. There are ways that we do that, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about some of that.
Thank you for that. We have a question here. It says, how can we get closer to the wisdom with our limited body and brain?
That's the problem, really. The problem is we're always close to the wisdom, but the limitations that the questioner talks about is what stand between us and the experience. I know HPB made the statement that in order to really function from a spiritual consciousness, we had to paralyze the personality, were her words. That the personality, this body with the limitations it imposes, the emotions, the different levels of mind, all are filters to something that is always present. So we work through the mind on those things that are blocking us from this experience. We talked about diet. You control the things you feed the body, you control the things you feed the mind. Not just control, you choose. And just like with regular foods, as you become familiar with it, you develop a taste for it. And so with high thoughts, we develop a taste for it. With acts of kindness, we develop a taste for it. And that moves us ever closer. It's a gradual process, but it's one that sort of is in the nature of being a human being. HPB, again, her description of what is a human being, its highest spirit and lowest matter, linked by mind. So spirit in the attempt for it to function through lowest matter, it's a demanding. And so this is what we encounter with the limitations that the questioner talks about.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We have two questions about being happy. You had mentioned that we are here to be happy. And so one question is, are we not born happy and free? And the other is, isn't this the justification for our actions, the reason for all the problems in the world, this desire to be happy?
Yeah, I think that could be said to be true, but probably it's based on a misunderstanding, which I think is almost universal, of what we're talking about when we talk about happiness. Every single person wants to be happy. Every animal, everything wants to be happy. The problems we run into is that with our limitations, we really do have a very different idea of how this is arrived at. We base it on what our little experiences are, which basically, if I want ice cream and I get ice cream, in that moment I'm happy. So we get this idea that the satisfying of these various desires somehow results in happiness. That's what we experience. You want wealth, you want this certain bride or groom, you get it. And at that moment, certainly there is a sense of happiness, but all of this changes and the mind goes to reach for the next source of happiness. So we confuse happiness with satisfaction of desire. Basically, anytime we have an experience that we could describe as being happy, it results from what could be described as the temporary absence of desire. I want the ice cream cone, I get it. That desire fades for a moment, and then I describe that as happiness. So everybody wants to be happy, but what we fail to recognize, happiness is a symptom of something much deeper. It's not a goal. It's something that occurs as we develop in our understanding of ways to deal with the ever demanding desires of self. First, you have to recognize it. And then with that recognition, then you can kind of figure how it is you can approach that. But when we recognize that the source of happiness is the momentary cessation of the push of desire, that can set us on a different course. And that's not a course that leads to all of the problems in the world, because it requires a deep recognition of who I am in order for that to become active in me. And that's the cause of happiness, not just the limited experience of happiness. Happiness is a symptom of awareness.
So what then do you see as self-induced suffering is another question.
Yeah. What I would see as self-induced suffering would be the normal sort of course of most people's lives. That whether we regard it as such or not, we make choices. I mean, we're born into certain circumstances, and some people are born in the palace and some people are born in the street. And from that point, life starts to unfold. But you have people in both circumstances who are deeply happy. You have people in both circumstances who are deeply tortured. The circumstances aren't the defining aspect of it. So, yes, it's something where we can make choices, and this is what we do. Quite honestly, the people that we tend to admire the most are people who have made choices that seem to deepen some sort of understanding in spite of their circumstances. The people we talk about as having made sacrifices. You look at a man like, the Dalai Lama, for instance. He's, a cultural icon for many of us. But he's a man who, I was on hand on one occasion and somebody asked him about his lifetime of practice and its results. You've been at this, you're deep, you're regarded as an incarnation of enlightened being. So what has your practice done for you? And it's a very interesting response, because he says, I think that now I can say mostly I'm happy. Not that he's always happy and that life is always he's at the beach, but mostly he is happy. And I think that's something that is a useful sort of indication from someone who is regarded as, a highly spiritual person, that the problems don't go away, but the ways in which we respond are things that can deepen as we give awareness to it.
Thank you. Would you say that happiness that we seek is really the one that is lasting, that is not rooted on things that are impermanent and therefore subject to the switching between happiness and suffering?
I think that's what it is. But at least as far as I can tell, I don't know that it's a space that we can inhabit continually. I think what comes from practice is that we establish a connection with that, but that the fact of all that is involved in being human necessarily pulls us this way and that. But while there is that connection, we can always trace our way back to it. I mean, when I look at just so many things, you look at the Bible again, for example, and Jesus, who is, the Messiah. He is like the pinnacle of flowered human consciousness. He walks into the temple at one time and he sees people changing money and trading goods, and he loses it. And he just overturns the tables. He whips the people that are there. And, we're talking about the Messiah in this case. In the Mahatma letters, one of the letters from KH talks about how a big kind of disruption came about from something that he wrote or he had written that was incomplete. And he said it occurred at a time when he was deeply tired and didn't give it the necessary focus. So even the Mahatma has the moments when he is not functioning at the level that is the Mahatma's consciousness. So how can we expect less with ourselves? We have to be a little bit more generous, I think, with ourselves. And that can help with a lot of this, because we're going to be wrong more than we're right. But so long as we can deepen and maintain this connection with this space that's inside.
Thank you, Tim. Actually, that answer leads right next, or maybe is almost an answer to the next question. Former President, TS President George Arundel had said that we must be able to have one foot in the inner world and the other in the outer. And so the question was, is it possible to keep our consciousness in both at the same time? Or how do we do that constant switching?
Well, I think we're all relatively adept at it at this point. The awareness is what is most important. And we have to give ourselves time to fully withdraw from the outer world so that we can soak ourselves in a different level of experience. And then when we return to our normal duties, they're infused with something else. I mean, we go to visit a friend's home and we have a happy time and we come back to some other activity that we're doing. And while we are fresh from that experience, we're infused with happiness. We hear an uplifting talk, or we're in the presence of an uplifting person. We carry that upliftment with us when we go. It has a way of kind of petering out. So it has to be regularly recharged. And each of us finds a way to do that.
Thank you. We have a number of questions, and I don't know how much more time we have, but I'll try to do two more. While a meditation practice was not mentioned in your talk, it seems that it is implied that such a practice is necessary. So one of the questions was, how would you please share or describe a meditation approach that you personally use for finding the deeper connections to the inner life? And of course, another follow-up question to that we received is using that to overcome the illusions of, let's say, identification with the body or with this material world.
Yeah, I've been noticing with myself that more and more these days, I use less and less the phrase meditation for what it is we do when we sit on our cushions or in our chairs. I think very often, very real and deep things can be trivialized. And meditation is on the verge of getting into that territory in some quarters. I tend to speak more in terms of experimenting with quiet these days. Meditation, as I understand it, actual meditation, is when the hold and the involvement in thinking and thoughts are, when we are involved in thinking, when we are involved in the thought process, producing or examining thoughts, we're not meditating. You know, the famous expression, meditation is not what you think, is what. So when we sit, as a general rule, what we are doing is what musicians do when they sit to practice. We are practicing meditation. The musician isn't playing music when he plays the scale, he's practicing. We are practicing meditation with the idea that through this practice, we will actually reach a state of quiet, that as we continue with it, we can go even deeper to a state of stillness, and ultimately on those life-changing moments to actual silence. So in terms of an actual practice, there are innumerable ways to approach it. Let me just suggest something of a rather general nature. At least for me, you know, very often the way I might approach a session of quiet begins with something like, I guess I could describe it as reverence. So some sort of seeing or looking at something that is really sacred to me. For many people, it takes the form of a teacher or of a very, very high idea, but something that is powerful, something that is all-giving, and something to which we can look toward. And so with that as an opening setting, that has an effect, at least for me. From that, you know, there is necessarily some sense of gratefulness, of gratitude for this, even if it's this moment of exposure. For many of us, it's a gratitude for what is a cumulative lifetime that brings us to this moment where we can actually finally genuinely appreciate. So a gratitude. Out of that sense of gratitude, generally there's something that flows that is expansive. HPB, in her diagram of meditation, the first thing she says is that first we have to try to conceive of unity by expansion in space. So this sense of expansion is something that then naturally moves toward stillness in the presence of that which is sublime, in the presence of a recognition that is expressed in gratitude, and expansion takes place that leads to a potential for quiet, to sit in the presence of. And to the extent that, you know, we become empty in this process, you know, the thinking about the laundry and the next thought we have to think or the talk we have to give, that those move away, then we actually have the potential to genuinely meditate, to be free from our engagement in thinking and thought. And then, of course, there is the, you know, we've got to come back. At some point, we won't come back. You know, the body will have served its purpose and we'll move on. So all of this is in many ways preparation for that moment, but also it creates this kind of constant capacity for, you know, wonder, for openness to something more to flow in and to make its presence known. And this is, at least from my perspective, This is the value of this practice in day-to-day life and in the world, answering the needs of the world.
It's actually quite beautiful, Tim. I'll sneak in one last question, although there are more. And this is a little bit unrelated to your talk. Thinking about the mission of the Theosophical Society and its members, from your perspective, what will be the presence of the TS in the world in the next few years? Where will your accent be?
Yeah, the Theosophical Society exists to make it known that theosophy, that an ageless wisdom actually exists. So, the idea, I think, of the founders had been that this ageless wisdom is so potent that even to the degree that it is touched, that it has effects. And we've seen that over the Theosophical Society's history. So I think the expression of a wisdom in a way that it can be touched by others is of great value. At least at Adyar, we are making attempts in very practical ways. I mean, we're dealing with trying to educate. We're moving into that experiment of educating young people, not in the core ideas of the Theosophicals, not about the 7 bodies of the human being, but about the qualities, the powers that are latent within us of kindness, of compassion, and how those things can be expressed. So an educational process that will create another generation. We don't know how that will pan out. We are very fortunate in that 2 things have come together with the reaching into the idea of expressing compassion and really unity with the animal world that's been taking place at our animal dispensary. We work on a lot of practical ways. And I think probably for the next, for the time that I'm going to be involved in the position I am, I would hope that we would be able to use the Theosophical Society at Adyar as something of a laboratory for the reaching out to humanity, to the seasoning, the leavening of human thought. I mean, everybody knows wherever we are in the world right now, this is a very, very challenging time. And if you were to ask me, I would say that we have yet to see the challenges that we have created for ourselves in the future and near future. So it's something where a certain stability of mind is going to be a huge requirement in places around the globe. And so to the degree that this Theosophical Society, its work and the basis for it, which is theosophy, can sink in to people or members, will be the thing that will determine whether this experiment has been of value or not.
Thank you so much, Tim. Apologies to the others that we can't cover all of the questions that came in, but once again, I guess we're out of time, but I wanted to congratulate you, Tim, the staff, the convention organizers, and all of the participants for a most successful convention. It's been wonderful. I also want to thank the audience for joining us today, and to all of you, greetings for a wonderful new year ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Elena. Thank you all. Happy and prosperous new year to us all.